Hey guys, welcome to CyberPlatter. This is a series on application and product security. Today we will discuss one of the secure design principles or secure architecture principles called least privilege, principle of least privilege. I will link it in the description box, the entire series that is related to application and product security. In this video, we will learn what is least privilege, examples, real-time examples related to least privilege, some key terms related to the principle of least privilege, how to implement it and where to implement it, and what is the importance. What is least privilege? So in any organization, finding the right balance between convenience and security is very important. On the security side, you want to keep the systems, data, applications, products, everything secure to protect against, data breaches, insider threats, and errors. On the other hand, it's important for employees to work efficiently. That means you can't slow them down by unnecessary restrictions. So if there are too many restrictions, employees can get frustrated and it can slow down productivity, right? But if there are no restrictions or very few of them, it may expose the organization to security risks. So you'll have to strike a balance between these. One effective way to achieve this balance is by applying security principles. The security principles should allow for the necessary control without hindering operations. And one of the prime examples of this is least privilege. Least privilege is where users, applications, and systems are given only the minimum, only the necessary access they need to perform their jobs, and nothing more than that. We are only giving them the permissions that is required to complete their task. No more, no less. Because of this, it reduces security risks, also maintaining productivity. Next, let's see what are the benefits of least privilege. Why do we need to use least privilege, right? First benefit is that it minimizes attack surface. So with least privilege comes restricted access. So with restricted access, the risk of unauthorized actions, data breaches, or lateral movement by attackers is reduced. Like for example, consider a sensitive data directory. You're applying least privilege for this data directory and you're allowing only some specific roles to access this directory. And this reduces the chance of exposure, suppose in case an employee's account is compromised. The next benefit is that it mitigates damage from compromised accounts. It's kind of related to minimizes attack surface that we discussed. A better example would be, say, a user has only read-only access to some reports. They cannot modify it or delete those files. So even if an attacker gains access to this user's account, they cannot alter or erase critical data. They can only read the report. So you're mitigating the damage. That is, you're reducing the potential damage. Least privilege enhances regulatory compliance. Many data protection regulations, like for example GDPR, HIPAA, all of them require limited access to sensitive data to make sure, privacy and integrity are intact. So least privilege can help in that as well. Next is that it reduces human error. That is, by restricting permissions, we decrease the likelihood of accidental deletion or modification of critical files. Suppose, say, there is an intern who's working on data entry. They can only update specific sections of a database without being able to access or modify more sensitive areas. So, there's less chance for human error. So these are some of the key benefits of least privilege, but there are many others as well. Like for example, it also helps to improve system stability and performance. Consider that developers who work in test environment will not be given access to production environment, so they cannot deploy anything in production. This can help in preserve stability and performance because there'll be no unnecessary changes, no system configuration changes that are made by the developers in the production environment, which in turn improves stability and performance. Before getting to know how least privilege can be implemented and where it can be implemented, let's see some of the key terms that are associated with least privilege. The first one is role-based access control, RBAC. So access control is an approach to managing user permissions. There are many different types of access control, like for example, RBAC, attribute-based access control, mandatory access control, discretionary access control. There is a separate video which talks about all of these in depth. For now, we will only concentrate on role-based access control and attribute-based access control because these are generally used in many of the organizations. Okay, so role-based access control, like the name itself suggests, access rights are assigned based on the roles users play within an organization. So instead of assigning permissions directly to each user, users are grouped into roles and each role is associated with specific permissions. I am just taking users as an example, okay? But the same logic can be applied for applications, your APIs, systems. We will also see where you can implement least privilege. Because it is easier to explain, I'm taking users as an example for now. There are 4 key components in RBAC. The first one is roles. So these are defined jobs or responsibilities within an organization. Next one is permissions. These are specific access rights required to perform actions. And then there are users. These are individuals who are assigned roles based on their responsibilities. Then there is role assignment. This is the process of linking users to roles and roles to permissions. Let's consider a hospital example, okay? This hospital uses RBAC for access control in its patient information system. There are 3 different roles in this hospital. The first one is doctor. So doctor role can view and update patient records and prescribe medication. The next one is nurse. These guys can view patient records and administer medications. There is another role called receptionist. This can schedule appointments but cannot access patient medical records. Now say there are 2 doctors in this hospital, Dr. A and Dr. B. Both of them are assigned this role called doctor. Then maybe there are 3 nurses, C, D, E, and all of these 3 are given the nurse role. Then there is one receptionist, say F, and this one is assigned to the receptionist role. Now, when Dr. A logs into the system and can access and update patient records as allowed by the doctor role, and these nurses can log into view records but cannot prescribe medications or alter any diagnostic information. And the receptionist F, who is assigned the receptionist role, has access only to scheduling features. So now a different doctor joins, like for example G, he is given the role of this doctor role. So by assigning permissions at the role level, RBAC reduces any administrative overhead and improves security. So it makes sure that individuals only have access to the information and access. So it makes sure that the individuals only have access to the information and actions necessary for their roles. This also simplifies managing permissions, especially, in large organizations. The next access control that we will discuss is attribute-based access control. This is a little bit more flexible. It grants access based on a variety of attributes. Yeah, these attributes can be associated with resources, users, and environment or actions, right? So in RBAC, permissions were tied to roles or identities directly. But in attribute-based access control, access decisions are made based on attributes or characteristics of users, resources, and contexts. So there are 2 key components of attribute-based access control. The first one is the attributes themselves. These are the characteristics or properties that define users, resources, actions, and environments. So there are user attributes. These are the properties of the user such as department, role, location, and security clearance level. Like for example, if it is an employee role, it can be like financial analyst, or department can be audit. And then there is resource attributes. These are the characteristics of the resource such as type, classification, level, and data owner. Like for example, document classification example can be confidential. And then there are environmental attributes. These are contextual factors. Like for example, what time of the day it is, or location of access. Like for example, the access is from headquarters, or the device type. For example, a corporate laptop. Those fall under environmental attributes. The next one is the action attributes. This is the type of action that is requested. Like for example, view, edit, read, write, or delete. The next key component of ABAC is a policy. So policies are logical rules that define access permissions based on attribute conditions. Suppose say I might create a policy saying only employees in the audit department with a security clearance of high can access confidential documents from a corporate laptop during business hours. Or I can create another policy saying only financial analysts may view reports related to clients in their assigned region, but cannot edit them unless they have managerial approval. So you get the idea, right? How I can create policies. So that is about attribute-based access control. The next key component is just-in-time access. So this is also an access control model. Just-in-time provides users with temporary, time-limited access to resources, applications, or systems. That is only when they need it, rather than granting them long-term or persistent access. Let's see some of the key features of just-in-time access. First one is, like I mentioned, temporary access. Access is granted only for a specific period or session. Next one is on-demand access. Users request access only when it is needed, and usually this undergoes approval and logging. Next is access expiration. So access automatically expires after the specified period. So there is no need for manual revocation of access. Next is just enough access. This is often paired with just-in-time access. This provides only the minimum permissions needed to complete a task. Let's consider an example. Let's say there is an employee called Mary. She is a developer and she is working on resolving some high priority bug that is affecting production system. But Mary doesn't typically have access to production, that is admin access to production. Now comes the just-in-time access process. So what should Mary do? She will submit a just-in-time access request. And this is for, say, temporary admin permissions in the production environment. This request should include a justification. Justification may be that, she's working on a high priority bug that is affecting the production system. And she should also mention the duration for which she needs access. Like for example, 2 hours. And then this request goes through an approval process where a manager or an automated system reviews and grants access for a limited time. And then Mary receives the admin permissions to fix the issue, but these permissions are set to expire after 2 hours. So it ensures that our access is automatically revoked without needing further intervention. So what are the benefits? Once Mary's task is complete or the time limit expires, her access is removed, reducing potential risks. Also, just-in-time system locks her access, creating an audit trail for monitoring and compliance. Okay, that's about just-in-time access. Let's move on to the next concept. It's called privilege or authorization creep. This occurs when an employee accumulates more access permissions over time than it is actually necessary for their current job role. This often happens, like for example, the employees are switching roles or taking on temporary responsibilities or are granted additional permissions without having their old permissions removed. Let's see this with an example. Let's again consider Mary's example. Say Mary starts as a junior developer in a company. So initially, Mary has access only to the development environment. So she doesn't have access to the production environment. And this aligns with her role as well because she's a junior developer. Then say after a year, Alice is promoted to a senior developer. And this role requires occasional access to production environment as well, say for troubleshooting. So instead of adjusting her permissions, her new permissions are simply added to her existing ones. So she has access to development as well as production environment now. And then say later Alice is temporarily assigned to help with database administration. So she is granted additional permissions to access the database as well now. But after this temporary project is over, the permissions are not removed. So now she has development environment access, production environment access, and as well as database access. So she has accumulated a lot of access now. This is how the privilege or authorization creep works. So an employee gets more access than what is necessary for their role. The next concept is access review. So this is the process in which managers or system owners periodically evaluate the access permissions of users, systems, or applications to ensure they align with their current roles and responsibilities. So the goal is to confirm that each user, application, or system has only the necessary level of access, which actually helps prevent privilege creep and reduces security risks because you're reviewing it and you will get to know if anybody has more access. Let's say that there is an example organization with sensitive financial data. So every quarter, department managers conduct an access review for their teams. Let's look at the process, how it is done. First the HR generates a report listing, say, all employees, their roles, and the permissions they currently hold. And then each department manager reviews the list to verify whether each employee's access is still necessary based on their current job responsibilities. So what can you identify when this review happens? Say that there is one employee, Emma, who recently moved from finance department to the marketing team. But the report might show that she still has access to financial databases that are no longer relevant to her new role. So you can change those permissions here. So during the access review, Emma's manager may identify this discrepancy and request to revoke her access to the financial databases to prevent unauthorized access. Also, suppose say there is another employee, say John, has taken on additional responsibilities that require access to specific sales data, but he is not given that access. So the manager can look at the list and request for John's access to those specific sales data. So that is how access review works. This is a very powerful tool that can be implemented. So when I'm going through these, right, if you are a developer or engineer, software engineer or architect, you can think how I can implement these in my product or application. But if it is a security person, cybersecurity person watching this video, if this process is not there in your organization, you can actually get this implemented. These are some of the very powerful tools. The next concept is zero trust security model. This is a kind of a buzzword nowadays. Most of you might know, but we will refresh it here. So this is a security approach where no entity, whether inside the organization's network or outside the organization's network, is automatically trusted. But instead, every user and device must be authenticated, authorized, and continuously validated before being granted or maintaining access to applications and data. Actually, zero trust operates under the principle never trust, always verify. So back then, people would get access to systems or data just because they were inside the organization's network. But now, if you have zero trust security model, every connection inside or outside is authenticated, authorized, and validated. There are three key principles of zero trust. The first one is to verify explicitly. That is, always authenticate and authorize every access request regardless of where it originates. Next one is least privilege access, that is to grant the minimum level of access necessary to complete a task. Next concept is assume breach. So you are designing systems assuming attackers are already inside the network and implement measures to limit potential damage. So it's a security mindset assume breach where organizations operate under the assumption that attackers will at some point find a way to get past defenses. So instead of focusing only on keeping attackers out, it emphasizes detecting, containing, and minimizing damage from potential breaches. So in simple terms, it's like expecting that despite having strong locks on your doors and windows, someone might still get inside. So you have your alarms, cameras, and locked rooms within the house to protect your valuable items and also to respond quickly to any break-ins. It's a proactive approach. Now let's look at an example of zero trust in action. Let's consider a financial company that wants to secure employee access to sensitive customer data. First one is authentication and access control. So all the employees must use multi-factor authentication, MFA, each time they log in, ensuring only verified users gain access. The second thing that they have done here is also device verification. The company checks that the device accessing data is approved and meets security standards. Like for example, it has up-to-date antivirus software, and then only then you provide access. Next is the least privilege access. So employees are only granted access to data relevant to their roles. Like for example, a customer service representative can view customer contact information but cannot access sensitive financial details. Next is continuous monitoring. So here the system monitors all activity for unusual behavior, like for example an access from unknown location or times outside of business hours that you are accessing it. And if there is suspicious activity, access is automatically restricted until further verification. Maybe you can use your SIM and source solution for this, right? And then there is segmentation. The network is segmented so that even if an attacker compromises one area, they cannot access other critical parts of the system without additional authentication. Next concept is privileged access management, PAM. So this is a security solution that manages and controls elevated, that is privileged access and permissions for users, accounts, processes, systems, apps within an IT environment. So privileged accounts have greater access rights than the normal accounts, right? Often this allows administrative access to critical systems. There are many PAM solutions that are available and they are designed to minimize the risk of security breaches by enforcing strict controls on how privileged access is granted, monitored, and used. Let's see some of the key components of a PAM system. First is the access controls. So this enforces policies to limit privileged access only to users who need it. Next is session monitoring and recording. So we track and record activities during privileged sessions for accountability and auditing. Next is just-in-time access. We discussed about this previously. This grants temporary privileged access as needed and it reduces the time windows of potential exposure because it is temporary. Next is password management. This ensures secure storage, rotation, and generation of privileged account passwords. Let's consider another example. Consider actually the same financial organization. Say that only IT admins and specific data analysts need access to critical financial databases for maintenance and analysis. So then what do? All privileged account passwords, like for example admin accounts, are stored in a secure PAM password vault. So users cannot view or share passwords directly. And when somebody needs access, they request for just-in-time access, provide their justification, provide for how long they want the access for, and the PAM system verifies their identity through, multi-factor authentication and grants access only for the time needed to complete the task. And once their work is done, their access is automatically revoked. And then when the admin is accessing the database, the PAM system monitors their session in real time. Any suspicious activities such as trying to access unauthorized tables or rows or columns or whatever it is, an alert is triggered, and all privileged access activities are recorded and can be audited to ensure compliance with regulations and internal policies. The next concept is logging and monitoring. So these are used to track and observe activity within an IT environment. They help detect and respond to suspicious activities. They also help in supporting compliance, and they enforce the principle of least privilege by identifying unauthorized access attempts or privilege misuse. So logging involves recording events and actions that occur in a system. Logs can capture details such as login attempts, file access, system changes, and application errors. And then there is monitoring. This is the real-time or near real-time observation of system logs and activities. Monitoring tools analyze logs and other data to detect unusual patterns or behavior. So consider I might have set my logging configuration saying that every time a privileged, like for example an admin or root user logs in and makes a change, their actions are logged with details such as timestamp, when did they make the change, their user ID, maybe their IP address, and what action they performed. So if an admin accesses customer records at unusual hours or downloads a large volume of data, these actions are recorded in the system logs as well. So this is logging. Then the monitoring software continuously reviews the logs in real time. So whatever we have captured, privileged users, timestamp, user ID, is he downloading a large volume of data or is he accessing data at unusual hours? The monitoring software will continuously review these logs. If the monitoring system detects unusual activities, such as a privileged user accessing records outside of business hours, it generates an alert. And then the security teams are notified of that alert. This will allow them to investigate and take action if needed. So that's about logging and monitoring. You can also set up automatic actions as well, right? Even before it goes to the security team, you can temporarily suspend users access, and then the security team can review it and find out more. So these were some of the concepts that are related to least privilege. Now we will see how actually to implement least privilege. There are many ways to implement least privilege, but we will see one of the common step-by-step process. First one is to identify and categorize assets. So you list critical systems, data, and resources that need protection. And you also classify these based on sensitivity and who typically needs access. Next is to determine roles within the organization or within your product or application and specify access required for each role. So you need to avoid granting users more permissions than necessary for their tasks. Next, you can use RBAC or ABAC like we discussed before to assign permissions based on their job roles or attributes. Make sure that you update roles and access rights as responsibilities or roles evolve. Next is implementing the principle of least privilege. Limit access to only essential functions within applications. For instance, grant users read-only access if they don't need editing rights. Regularly review and restrict your API access to specific endpoints necessary for each application or user. We will talk about more ways or where to implement least privilege in the next slide, I think. Next is just-in-time access. You grant elevated permissions temporarily only when needed, such as during specific task hours or incident hours. And you automatically revoke these elevated privileges once the task is complete. Next is to isolate sensitive systems and data. So you segregate sensitive systems or databases in isolated network segments and limit access to specific users or applications. You can use firewalls, access control lists to restrict network access to critical resources. Next is multi-factor authentication. This is to add an extra layer of security by requiring MFA for accessing sensitive systems or performing high-risk actions. Apply MFA selectively based on the sensitivity of the asset or data. Next is perform regular audits to ensure users still require their assigned permissions. Remove outdated or unnecessary access to maintain strict adherence to the least privilege. Next is that you need to make sure that you provide external parties with scoped, time-bound access based on specific project needs. Don't give them any extra access. And also revoke access immediately after contract completion or project closure. Next, you can use privileged access management like we talked about, PAM tools, to automate the assignment and revocation of access. You need to monitor access patterns, generate alerts for unusual access requests, and audit privileged activities regularly. So these are some of the steps that you can follow to implement least privilege. Next is where to implement this. This is not just at the user level, right? You can implement it at app level, system or OS level, network, database, cloud level, device level, development and production environments, APIs, microservices. You can implement it at every level, even including physical security level, logging and monitoring, everything. Let's see a couple of examples how this can be done. The first one is the user example. The first one is implementing it at the user level. We have already talked about this example. Say in a hospital, we have doctors, nurses, and admin staff. Doctors need to view and update patient records. So they are given access to patient records, but they don't need full admin rights to the hospital scheduling system, right? So they are not given access to that. Then there are nurses who assist doctors by helping with patient care. They need to view the patient record, but they don't have to update it or edit it. So they are only given read-only access. And then there are admin staff as well. They handle scheduling, billing, and general paperwork. So they do not need any access to the patient records. They don't even have to see it. So they are not given access to sensitive patient health information, and they are given access only to systems that handle scheduling and billing, but no access to detailed patient health records. That's how you do it at the user level, right? Next, we will see how it is done at the network level. Say there is an online retail application that handles user accounts, product inventory, and payment processing. And this is trying to employ the least privilege principle for network security. So the application architecture is divided into three different network segments. The first one is the user layer, and then there is the app layer, and then the database layer. User layer is accessible by customers for browsing products and making purchases. And app layer handles business logic, like for example, processing orders and managing inventory. Then there is database layer, which contains sensitive customer and transaction data. And database layer is isolated from direct access by other layers. So you need to configure firewalls to enforce strict access controls. So for the user interface layer, you are opening only the ports 80, that is for HTTP, and 443 for HTTPS, and these ports are open to external traffic for customer interaction. And then for app layer, there is 8080 for system management, and then for the database layer, for connection with the database layer, I'm going to open 3306, say my database is MySQL. And then for the database, I'm going to open only 3306 MySQL port for secure communication with the app layer. So that's how I will keep the firewall rules limited. Next is at the device level, how do you implement least privilege? Imagine there is some tech company. It has some highly sensitive production servers, and these production servers store critical data. So the production servers are configured so that no user or device can directly access them. Instead, all access must go through a designated jump server. Jump server acts as an proxy server or intermediary server. So jump server usually has strict access control policies and logs all connections. If you're not doing so, you should be doing it. So this is the user device, say the developers or admins who need access to the production environment must first make connection to the jump server, and then so they're making that connection from their local device, and then from the jump server they will connect to the production server. So you can make sure that there is device whitelisting, like for example only pre-approved devices, and you can do that by specific IPs or device certificates. And only these pre-approved devices are permitted to connect to the jump server. And also you can say that the production servers are configured to accept connections only exclusively from the jump server. So that is how you set up least privilege at device level. So when you're building an application or product, you know that product more than anybody else. So whenever you're adding a component or giving access to something, make sure only necessary access or necessary ports or necessary connections are open, especially when it comes to, if you're using a lot of APIs or a lot of connections to the internet, make sure that only what is required is open, or only what is required is given access to. So that's it about least privilege. I hope this video helped you understand more about least privilege, and it might also help you to implement this in your application or product that you're building. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share our videos. That helps us a lot. I will see you in another secure design concept video very soon. Bye-bye.